Hello, and welcome to Get Recc'd. I am one of your hosts, Louis Falgu,
And I am your other host, Stephen Falgu,
and this is Get Recc'd.
back at it again.
Yeah,
This is Get Wrecked After Dark edition. We're recording quite late on my coast.
yeah, yeah,
So this is for
you're,
all you night owls out there.
well, unless they're on my coast, in which case, or in some other international country where it may be very, very early in the morning.
I hope we have international listeners. This is a shout out to all of our international listeners that we have.
Yeah, over there in Kyrgyzstan.
Good morning. This is your morning treat. I hope you're sipping a coffee, listening to us ramble on.
Yes. About, things that you have never heard of.
Right.
Okay.
In a language you may or may not speak.
Yeah. Okay.
We have two, I would say, very interesting things to talk about today, as we usually do.
Yes.
But one of them includes international favorite R. Kelly.
Uh-huh. Definitely.
So we will get to him.
And international favorites, Nuchomo Hotel.
Right. Yeah, because not only are we recording to the internationals, we're also recording to the people in the 90s.
Yeah.
So if you're a real 90s kid out there, this one's for you.
Yeah. I think we should jump into it, yeah?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Well, we'll begin with In the Airplane Over the Sea, which I recommended to Steven last episode. It is the 20th anniversary-ish. I mean, it's the 20th year since it came out. And so I'll just let you start.
Yeah, so I listened to this one quite a number of times. First of all, I want to say that I think I talk about this pretty much every time we talk about an album, because I feel like I get a lot of albums.
No.
But I wanted to talk about, I thought that I really like the cover art. I don't know what it is about it. It like reminds me very much of like a The Scream or
Really?
some like really impressionist almost stuff that's going on there on the album. So that was kind of fun. I think the other thing is it's like the album art to me very much fits in with the sound of the album itself in a
Yeah.
weird way. Like I feel like, okay, so this is like a general point of the album. The rhythms were very folksy, very sometimes marching, and it reminded me of like you're sitting there on a boat, like in the middle of the sea, right?
Yeah.
And
In the boat over the sea.
not in an airplane, you're in a boat
Yeah.
now,
Yeah.
okay? And so this album art, I was like, dang, that's like exactly what I picture what I'm listening to.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just like a small point.
It looks very nostalgic. It's got a very
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Yeah, 90s kids will remember
I don't mean that kind of
this
nostalgia.
this one.
Came out the year I was
Uh,
born, though.
Yes, I remember. I remember when this album was birthed, and then when you were. Um, so I will say, as I was listening to this album, there are. Okay. I wanted to ask you this because I like when albums attempt this sort of thing, and this album does this. What I'm going to talk about, but the issue that I always have is it's like I don't know if it's a function of me not listening to it on a record or what it is, but this album, a lot of the tracks bleed into each other.
What what do you mean? As in they transition directly into the next track without a
They,
silence?
yep, they
Yes.
transition directly.
Yes.
So the problem is, I don't know if it's a function of the way that I listen to this stuff. There is always a pause, and it's always so weird.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I don't know if the record is a seamless transition between tracks.
No, well, the record, the CD, and the CD rips tend to be. I mean, I know what you're talking about. That can happen depending on like the source, especially if you listen to it streamed. I've seen
Right.
that happens, but like when I rip it from CDs or buy it on iTunes or whatever, I you don't have that problem. So, but yeah, I know that can be
Okay.
really annoying whenever that does happen. So I imagine that was a bit off-putting, but that is not a fault of the album
Yeah,
because
that's
the
not
album.
a fault of the album. That was just something I wanted to bring up. To the point of that
Yeah,
is that my question was, were some of these tracks recorded continuously?
I doubt it. Generally, when bands do this kind of thing, they don't. It's not like one recording that's cut up. They're usually crossfaded or stuff like that. So I don't actually know the answer to that though. Maybe.
Because I'm always curious whenever a band goes for something like that, whether they're actually continuous recording or whether it's just a function of, like you mentioned, of them doing some crossfading and some trickery.
In the case of some of the tracks, usually they fade in like through a drone, so I would guess that in those cases that it was not the same recording. Like I think goes to Untitled, for example, where it's just a drone that fades between them. So I honestly don't know, but probably not.
So I enjoyed the overall sound of this album, and it reminded me a lot of like this combination of, there were some, what I felt like some Sergeant Pepper influences. I felt
Yes.
that in a couple tracks. um it, the melodies and the vocals were similar to, felt like it reminded me a lot of like kind of a Decemberists or like something like that. When I was listening to this, I was kind of getting like this cross between Decemberists and like a Sergeant Pepper. And I think what I liked about the album were, so you mentioned Untitled, and there was another one which I don't remember what the
The
name of
Fool.
it was. Yeah, The Fool, where it just started going into this like syncopated rhythm, just no vocals, or minimal vocals,
Oh, it's just
just kind of a,
instrumental. Yeah.
yeah, just instrumental. And I really enjoyed breaking up the album in that way. I think the other, while I was listening to this, so it almost feels like there's, the lyrics have this, I don't know if I want to call it like naivete or this like exploration, like this youthful exploration of the world. I felt that in a couple tracks where it's like it almost feels like this is someone who, um, is new to everything and is trying to understand sexuality and religion. I think there are a lot of tracks on here where, uh, those are explicitly stated themes of the tracks, talking about like, especially in like the King of Flowers, the first one, and then going into this to part 2 and 3, which is one track. Um, and then even further on with like Two-Headed Boy and talking about semen covering mountains or something.
Yeah, communist daughter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so I thought that was interesting, uh, as just like a repeated element that I was getting as I was listening to this. Um, I think those are probably the big things that I had to say on this one. Um,
Yeah.
so
So
what are some of your thoughts?
yeah. So this is my favorite album of all time. Um, I've wrestled with it a little
Okay.
bit in the past like year maybe, and there was a time when I'd say, and maybe I still would. It's a bit tough, but there are like three albums I think of that are like my top three, and I can't really order them. So I either would say this is my all-time favorite or this is among those three. It kind of depends on the day. Um, but I think this has been an album that I've been coming back to a lot, and I did end up wearing it out to the point where it just no longer had the impact for me that it was having. But having returned to it for the 20th anniversary, having not listened to it for a while, it hit me again. So I think it's fair to say that it's my favorite of all time. Um, and yeah, I mean, there's so much to say about this. I mean, for one thing, I think that this album has just an essential album flow. I mean, we talk about like an album that feels like a real cohesive package, like a real just piece of art in and of itself. And it's partially because the songs transition into each other, but it's also just because it just flows so wonderfully. It's so brilliant in how this album is paced, particularly, especially when with the variety of the types of tracks you have here, because obviously you've got the stripped down acoustic tracks like "Oh Comely" and "Two-Headed Boys" Part 1 and 2, or "Two-Headed Boy" Parts 1 and 2. And so you're able to break up the punkier tracks like "A Hall in 1945" or "King of Carrot Flowers" Part 3, for example, while all feeling like it goes together. Like everything is playing into the album package here. And you mentioned the album art, which, you know, maybe it seems minor because it's detached from the music, but I feel like it's relevant too. I mean, like it's the entire package of this thing is just phenomenal for starters. But I feel like the thing that has always, I think, really appealed to me about this record is just I feel like the way in which it evokes emotion is so unlike anything I've ever heard to date. I mean, because it has this profound sadness to it and this profound like nostalgia, this sort of like longing feeling throughout the entire record, even in its happier moments, like on "A Hall in 1945. I still get that vibe, even though it sounds more uplifting. And so but beyond that, lyrically, the album is so like abstract. It's so like coloring book almost. You know, the whole thing is so almost absurdist when you have lines like, you know, little boys play, like what, somebody turns into a little boy playing a piano filled with flames in Spain. It's just like it doesn't actually hold, it doesn't seem to hold any literal meaning or even metaphorical meaning. It's just a really powerful image. And lyrically, the album is just absolutely chock full of really powerful imagery. Like you're reading a book almost. You're reading a book that was probably written under the influence of various psychedelics, like in Alice in Wonderland. But
Yeah, I think psychedelic is definitely one thing that I got from this, but not in the same way that I feel like psychedelia was explored in like the 60s,
yeah,
right? Because I feel like in that exploration there were a lot of sitars and um, you know, like Indian themes surrounding um, psychedelia and that movement. And uh, this is like haunting almost,
yeah,
but not in a scary way, if that makes sense. It's not like haunting like oh man, this is getting to my core, and I don't know how to think about this. Almost like I would go back to the album we talked about last, Get Recc'd, right? That was haunting in
yeah,
that it made you think about the world.
yeah,
This is just haunting in that it's like the lyrics are kind of always there, and you don't really know what they mean, but they sound really good, and the rhythms are constantly marching, and it's a it's like you're on this long trip, but it's like this slow trip.
yes. No, absolutely. And one of the genres here is psychedelic folk. I mean, you talked about the album sounding folksy. I mean, that's fitting because it is a folk album, but it's got tons of influences. And like I was saying with the way the album's paced, you've got folk punk, you've got just straight up folk, indie folk, lo-fi. Another thing that's important to mention here is that this album is a big contender, you know, in the lo-fi genre, which I don't really know if it's fair to say it's a lo-fi indie album, but when it does get punkier, it certainly is. Like the guitar, the bass, and the drums are all so fuzzy, but they sound so warm. It doesn't sound like poorly recorded. It just sounds pleasantly fuzzed, you know. And I think that also contributes to the psychedelic vibe as well. That added with the just phenomenal horn section. But it's an album that's still difficult to pick apart in a lot of ways because it's such an it's an album that is purely evocative emotionally and not really in any other way, but you can't quite pinpoint why because like we were saying, the lyrics are not, they're extremely abstract. Like there are a few lines that are just profoundly sad no matter which way you slice them, but for the most part it really isn't. It's just vague and very strange. But it's the passion that Jeff Mangum sings these lines with. The fact that he's not the kind of singer who would go on The Voice and win. In fact, he'd probably be laughed off the stage immediately. He can't reach very high notes, yet he tries to all the time. But it's specifically for this reason that you can tell so much passion is going into every word he's singing. Especially on my favorite track here, O Comely, which is just this 8-minute almost dirge where he's just singing his fucking soul out the entire time, and it's just you and him on that track. It feels so personal in that way. But yeah, other times it's certainly more energetic, and so you get a moment like the Untitled instrumental here, which just feels so joyous. And then geniusly, it's immediately followed up with the final track here, which is just a tearjerker. So, God, I'm going to drone on and on, so you might want to pick up where I'm leaving off here.
Yeah, even to have a track that's just titled Untitled, I think is a good representation of what this album is.
Sure.
Because I saw that and I was like, okay, I'm definitely in for something here. And I think the one thing I would say about this album, which I felt interesting, was like I feel like this album starts and it hooked me and it never really let me go. Mm-hmm. I feel like with a lot of albums, there's some ramping that happens, right? And not always, but as a function often of like the track layout or the track listing. But here it's like King of Flowers Part 1 comes in and it's like, okay. And then he starts singing about how he loves Jesus Christ for like...
That's the big meme of the album. Right there,
yeah. And you just are hooked. And I think a portion of that is kind of what we talked about at the beginning of this, which is like, well, a lot of these tracks blend right into the next one, right? So you feel that natural progression of the album. But even of the tracks where they actually do break it up, I mean, those break points I feel like are very distinct. And you already talked about it. A lot of these, some of these are quite punksy, some of these are more acoustic, some of these are instrumental, and that breakup in the album actually makes this very easy to listen to all the way through.
Yeah, and you reminded me of something that's a big talking point I wanted to mention was, you know, as the album is changing and it's going through these sort of peaks and valleys of excitement, I find the most captivating moments of the album are the ones that are very much within those valleys, where it's like you're at the very lowest end of excitement in terms of instrumental excitement, in terms of the speed of the songs, in terms of the amount of instruments. So I'm talking about Two-Headed Boy, O Comely, Two-Headed Boy Part 2. These are the moments that, and King of Careflowers Part 1 for that matter, these are the moments where I guess I'll pass the question on to you, but for me, these are the ones where I find myself just the most floored and the most, and listening the most intently.
But, yeah, I agree. Especially the first track, and I would add to that the one that so I think I already mentioned this, but specifically the two instrumental only tracks, and especially Fool for whatever reason really grabbed me.
Oh yeah.
And I think again this is another function of, because I believe Two-Headed Boy just transitions right into Fool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that also is kind of like a part of that where it's like, okay, you're in that valley like you mentioned with Two-Headed Boy, and then you're ramping back up to this like syncopated marching, almost like Irish folk rhythm instrumental track with I think there's like some bagpipes in there,
Yeah.
um, uh,
Yeah, and
getting you
then it
back up to
ramps you up
Holland.
to it pulls you up to Holland 1945, which again
Right.
it's like that hill because that's one of the most, if not the no, one of the most exciting sort of punchy moments on the record. But I mean, yeah, I think it's kind of just like the reason I seem like I almost feel like I'm struggling to say things is mainly because like it's like every single thing about this record, every single element, from the production to the pacing to the songs themselves to the lyrics to the singing, to the instrumental performances. I mean, just every single thing about this is so perfect that I it's hard to pick them apart and talk about everything individually because I don't like there are few albums. I mean, even of like some of the best records of all time, there are a few albums that are this cohesive, that are structured this brilliantly, that are this like well paced and well thought out. Um, and it's in the vein of a Sgt. Pepper's or an album like that, which is it's a concise like 40 minutes, and it's just as long as it needs to be, and everything is like every sound, every song is right where it should be within the flow of the album, creating those peaks and valleys, which is super important to any engaging album listening experience, I think, because the albums that like keep you at one sort of level of excitement and maintain you there the whole time oftentimes are not as interesting.
Yeah.
So I mean,
So
yeah,
so I think we've said quite a bit about this one. I mean, I wanna I see we had some comments. I don't usually tackle these, but it's a new day on Get Wrecked.
sure.
Okay, so we had a comment from Paris, and Paris said, "I love you, Jesus Christ."
Yeah.
So I wanted to highlight that one.
That's a big
We had
deal.
a comment from Alonso
Hmm.
in our comment section. Alonso says, "Lewis, I thought your favorite album was Animals by Pink Floyd."
Yeah, I responded to that. Animals is in that top three. So I'll just fuck. I was gonna not say them because I thought I might recommend them down the road, but probably won't because that would just get redundant. The other two are Doolittle by Pixies and Animals by Pink Floyd. Those are the other two. So if I weren't telling you this are my favorite, I would say it's those three together.
And then Paris suggests the best album of all time is either Trout Mask Replica, which has been on this show
Yeah.
before,
Hmm.
or The Glow Part 2.
Yeah, the Glow Part 2 is a similar record to In the Airplane Over the Sea. I mean, they're different in a lot of ways. The Glow Part 2 is definitely more lo-fi. It came out after, by the way. It came out in 2001, I think. Or was it 2000? I don't know. But it also has a similar kind of vibe. It's a pretty different album. It's a much more inaccessible record. I mean, this is a very experimental album, but it's very accessible. That album, a lot less so. Some of those tracks are like noise rock, quite a few of them. But it's a similar record to this. I know Paris loves the shit out of the Glow Part 2. He likes it more than I do, for sure. And the Glow Part 2 is not structured better. Absolutely not. Don't even suggest that. Okay. But yeah.
And also, I would have to agree with Soldier Boy Tell 'Em being the best album of all time. So
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And the
hopefully,
collaborative album from Gucci Mane and V Nasty.
hopefully we get to Soldier Boy Tell 'Em one day on this show,
Oh god.
so we can really break it
Yeah,
down to its thematic elements and really understand the intricacy and nuance.
definitely. So seeing as I've already reviewed this album, and I would recommend anybody who wants to see my thoughts more structured because I know I was kind of all over the place talking about it here. I did a Neutral Milk Hotel retrospective on my channel, The Music Breakdown, which most of the people in the chat they come from that channel, so they already know. But you can watch my review of it in that video. Um, and yeah, I think we should wrap it up. So Steven, give your final thoughts on this record.
Okay, so this is the first time where I have a actually really hard time thinking about what my final thoughts are. So even in the case of Trout Mask Replica, which was something completely new to me, I still felt like I had a good understanding of where I thought it ranked as we typically give these things a score.
Well, we didn't give that one a score though, but
Right,
sure,
but
sure.
but we typically do, right? And
Yeah.
and I think that if we were to go back, I could give it a score.
Right.
This one, I don't know what it is. I think that it's some of the things that we talked about. It's so simple and complex at the same time
Yeah.
that it's hard to know where I would place it, even after the multiple times that I've listened to it leading up to this. Um,
But did you enjoy it?
uh, so yeah, so I don't know if I can give this one a number right now,
Okay.
but I did very highly enjoy this, and I think I would easily recommend this to everyone. So you just mentioned it. You can tell that this is experimental and that there is definitely this is not necessarily a sound you might have heard before, even though I was able to pick up a lot of the influences.
Well, a lot
I
of
think
bands have
even
been influenced by this record. Like indie rock
right,
as a whole changed quite a bit. Like this is a really important album. This is not just some obscure record that's my favorite. This is actually fairly well known. Um,
yep,
and yeah, so anyway, I just wanted to point that out because you mentioned the Decemberists, and I wanted to say it then, but I didn't want to cut you off. So
yeah, and so you had mentioned that it is easy to get into, and I think that's 100% true. I think anyone could listen to this album,
yeah,
um, and so I won't give it a score. I think this is finally one of the ones where I think I need to kind of sit on it, even after all the time we had between recommending and now.
okay.
But I will say I very, very highly enjoyed this one, and I would definitely recommend it.
Yeah, so it's my favorite album, so obviously I think it's a 10. Um, I I didn't mean to do two tens in a row. I was reminded that this was the 20th anniversary of In the Airplane Over the Sea, and I needed to recommend it before I forgot about it this year. Um, but but yeah, no, this is a flawless record. I mean, and I cannot think of many, like even most tens are not flawless, but I cannot pick a flaw in this. I think that I just, like I said, it's the essential album's album. Like this is absolutely a breathtaking record that I hope one day it already is recognized as a classic among the other ranks of essential classic albums. But sadly, still to this point, a lot of music publications still just do not recognize this when they do these like top 100 best albums of all time sort of lists. Maybe Pitchfork would, but that might be it. Although it may have gotten accolades since the last time I checked, but like Rolling Stone, I don't even think has this on their top 500, and it's like, I hope that one day down the line this thing will get that recognition to the point where this will be an iconic. This image you're seeing right here will be iconic. It will just transcend musicdom, and everybody will know this picture. Because I genuinely believe that this album deserves to be in those ranks. And I think it is getting there. It's had the underground buzz for ever since it came out. So it'll get there someday. And yeah, absolutely, I would recommend this. I recommend it to everybody who ever wants to listen to music ever. I recommend this to them because it's not like I said, it's not hard to get into. It's yes, it's experimental, it's very adventurous, but not at the cost of its listenability, like a Trout Mouse Replica, for example. But which I think is similarly brilliant. But yeah, yeah, I guess that's it.
Okay,
So
on to the next one.
happy 20th in meme album. Okay. Here we are. Trapped in the closet.
So I recommended to you the Robert Richard
I don't know.
Reggie Kelly's hip hopera, as he so called it, Trapped in the Closet. Started as an album. I want to say that first album was about 12 or 13 tracks, and those tracks were then created into a music video. And really, if you're listening to the album, you're doing this thing wrong, because this thing is 100% its music videos.
Yeah, so when I looked it up, I found that it was the first 5 parts that were on an album. And it's weird because it's like a 78-minute album I saw, and then the last 5 tracks are parts 1 through 5 of Trapped in the Closet, which is just weird. Like, at that point, why not just make it 1 track and make it like 12 minutes or whatever? I don't know. But yeah, so I've heard of this thing for what feels like a really long time. I guess it dates back to the Weird Al parody back in 2006, Trapped in the Drive-Thru. I guess might have been the first place I'd ever heard of this, but I think up to the point when Steven recommended this to me, I had seen one of the chapters just out of curiosity. I don't remember which one. It was one of the first 5, maybe the first, but I never watched through it. So I didn't know. I knew that this was going to be stupid. I knew that this was going to be ridiculous. And just by nature of it being an R. Kelly hip hopera or an R&B operetta or whatever you want to call it, it's bound to be kind of absurd. But, you know, I was surprised by how much I was enjoying it. Like, unironically enjoying it. Especially for like the first half of the first 12 chapters. Now, I did notice that he released these as like DVD sets. There was like chapters 1 through 12 and then chapters 13 through 22. And then I think it went up to 33, but I only watched up to 22. And so I'll sort of judge those blocks of chapters separately, almost because in a way, 13 to 22 is like the sequel to chapters 1 to 12. You don't have to talk about it that way, but that's how I'm going to talk about it because that's the way that I watched it. Yeah, so basically what this is just an R&B soap opera. That's the best way I can describe this. It's just stupid, and every single person in this series is unfaithful to their spouse. Even the people who you've never heard about before, they suddenly appear in one episode and then they're cheating on their spouse already. That is how this plays out for the first 12 chapters, and it's hilarious. I can tell there was an intentional sense of humor here. I think it's possible that for like the first 2 chapters there wasn't, but like at least by chapter 6 he knew this shit was stupid. And it was being played up that way to the fullest extent, and it's just, I think it's great. Like, the video aspect of it is pretty good. You know, it's shot fine, the performances are good enough, they all kind of work out. It's not incredible, and whenever there's a scene where a car is driving, it looks like dog shit. But and the music is the exact same song 22 times with new lyrics each time, basically. But I actually thought that worked really well because it almost enhanced the absurdity, and it allowed R. Kelly to play with your expectations. Like, occasionally, where you would expect more of the instrumental to continue because you've heard it a bunch of times, it'll stop, and then it'll just be his vocals, like, and he's like singing to himself at certain points, and that was always funny whenever that would happen. And I'm talking specifically about 1 to 12 right now because 13 to 22 is kind of a different beast. So how about we start with 1 to 12, and then talk a little bit about that as well, and then because I want to do 13 to 22 like in the latter half because, like I said, I think it's more of a sequel.
Yeah, I like to imagine or believe that R. Kelly doesn't know that this thing is absurd and that he really honestly, truthfully believes he's creating a masterpiece, because I'm not entirely convinced he isn't. And I think that to me makes this even better. Now, as you watch this thing, I mean, okay, so sticking to 1 to 12. So just in general, the theme, the primary theme, why it's called Trapped in the Closet is because he is sleeping with a girl, and then her husband comes home. Uh-oh, he didn't know she had a husband, so she makes him stuck in the closet, like hide in the closet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's hiding in the closet, and the husband comes home, and then he has to pull out his Beretta, and so he pulls out his gun, comes out of the closet, and it just gets more absurd than there. I mean, I think that the level of absurdity that happens within this thing is almost indescribable at points. Like, I think one of the ones that I remember is they're all sitting around talking about something or other, and then there's a midget there, a midget that they found under the sink or something like that.
Yep.
And then the midget farts, and then they all talk about how, oh, who farted?
Well,
and they're like,
no, he shits himself, and one of the other characters notices.
and
It's sung
and that-
by R. Kelly.
right, it's sung. That's the other thing, sung to music, and they're like, and it's like this. There's often this back and forth, which I find hilarious, where he's like, "Oh, whatever did this," and then he looked back at me,
Yeah.
and then I look back at him, and then he looked back at me. And the other thing that I love about this series is that there are all these super ridiculous stingers at the end of every episode. Like, oh, it turns out my husband was a priest and he's gay and he has another guy, and then it like goes into the next episode, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, it turns out there's a midget in the sink.
Yeah,
And then
that's
it
the
goes
most
into
memorable one, is when he breaks and he's like, "Now you're not going to believe what I'm about to tell you, but the one under the sink was a midget." It's like, what the fuck? Okay, so I want to contest you though on the point. You know, if I believed that R. Kelly took this seriously, I think that would actually enhance my enjoyment of this. So I'm not saying this lightly. I really do not think that he was. Now, like I said, chapters 1 to 5, I think that's extremely possible, because there's nothing really altogether like funny about that situation. It's just funny that it's being sung, and the way that, yeah, the sort of back and forth stuff, and the, you know, all I could say was "oh" moment. That I think that what might have been taken seriously, but no, absolutely after that this becomes a comedy, and it definitely knows it's a comedy. Like when you get to the midget named Big Man because he has a big dick, like, come on. This is, but the thing is too, it's like it's actually funny. Like it's not dumb to the point where it's not funny, and I'm talking about 1 to 12 right now. Let me make that clear. It's not like the last few parts got a little ridiculous for me. The 2 chapters with the midget were a little on the Adam Sandler comedy side of things. It didn't quite get there. And again, it's funny because it's being sung. Like, the fact that it's music makes some of these situations that would otherwise feel kind of Adam Sandler just that much funnier, because you have like R. Kelly crooning over this really, by the way, really, really nice instrumental. Like, I will say, the song at the core of Trapped in the Closet, that's repeated 22 times or 33 times, is actually really good. I don't know if you agree with me, but like it's got great dynamics, and like how it just constantly explodes into those great moments where it's like he gets more energized and then it calms down again. It's really nice, actually.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't know if this happens in the first 12, but as the series gets on, there's almost this like I don't know how I would describe, kind of bounciness to it. There's like, it's almost like a slide whistle sort of a thing that he brings in every now and then.
Yeah, it does. It like over the course, especially between the 2 blocks of chapters, the music does change a little bit. Some things will be added to the production. Like I said, sometimes the instrumental will drop out at points where it previously didn't, and stuff like that. But really, for the most part, it is just the same song a bunch of times.
And I definitely agree with you about the car scenes, by the way. But they look like shit in a way that is hilarious.
Yes,
it reminds me of Police Academy, I want to say, is the one that did this.
Is it?
Where it's like they're in a car and it's clearly a green screen, and the green screen behind them has nothing to do with them driving in a car.
Yeah.
And it almost feels like that a lot of the times. It's like they pass by the same house 3 times and all this. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, so oh God.
And so I don't know. I want to ask you, because it's been a while for me, but I don't remember in the first 12. do the stories diverge much? Because I remember as this series goes on, the characters remain the same, but they start to like diverge in their location, and he's like bouncing back and forth
Yeah.
between the characters.
So this is what I was going to talk about that starts to become a problem, and it starts to become a problem towards the end of this. So all of a sudden, in one chapter, suddenly R. Kelly becomes an unaffected narrator. And it's out of nowhere, because for the rest of the, like, from like parts 1 to I want to say 8 or 9, it's Sylvester, who's the main character, who is the narrator. So he's like, I did this, I did that. And then all of a sudden in like chapter 10 or 11, it's suddenly R. Kelly telling the story from the third person. So I don't know what was with that, and that was really odd, and it really threw me off, and that was a bad moment in this. And from that point on, that's when, yes, it starts to be like, and now we cut to Sylvester, and now we cut to this guy, and that guy, and this guy. And that starts to happen towards the very end of 1 to 12. But if you're thinking about that happening a lot, then you're definitely thinking about 13 and onward, because that's where that becomes like the thing.
Okay.
And that is what I'll say is the one problem that this series begins to have. And I'm specifically talking about 1 to 12, but it starts here. It's just, I preferred Sylvester being the first person narrator. I don't really think it works quite as well with R. Kelly narrating, and maybe it would have if he'd done that the whole time. But because he doesn't, it's just weird. It's like it comes out of nowhere. It seems odd for a second. It's off-putting, and suddenly he says the name Sylvester, and I'm just like, who the fuck is Sylvester? And it's like it was the guy who was saying I the whole time. I'm like, okay, didn't know that.
And I think I kind of understand why R. Kelly does that. Because R. Kelly starts to play multiple characters.
Yeah.
I think at one point in this series, he's playing like 4 simultaneous characters.
Yeah, he does. And a lot of times there's like at one point. Well, we'll get there when we get there. I want to actually is it okay if we do like a wrap up for each of the blocks of chapters? Because once again, I really want to talk about these as if they're distinct, because they were presented that way, and I did watch them that way.
Sure.
Okay, so so to finish up with 1 to 12, just because I really don't have much. I feel like I have more to say on the next batch, for better and for worse. But I think that chapters 1 to 12 is great, and I don't have shame in saying that. Like, I really enjoyed it. I was laughing the whole time. Sometimes I was laughing at it, but for the most part, I was laughing with it. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. It's like a dumb soap opera. All the characters are just complete archetypes. It's stupid, but it fucking works, and the music's good. It's just, I'm gonna say 8. I'm gonna say an 8 out of 10 for chapters 1 to 12, and I'm not even joking. And yeah, absolutely, I would recommend you watch it. And it's on YouTube. Like, Vivo has a playlist. Granted, some of the endings are cut off, but it's easy to watch, and it really doesn't take that long too. It doesn't overstay its welcome in the first 12 chapters, I felt like, which I thought this was gonna be like a real drag, given how many chapters there are of this, but it really wasn't.
Yeah, and I would say, actually, I think I'm gonna hold mine until we go to the end.
Okay, fair enough.
So let's continue on to this next block.
Yeah, so I'll move on to 13 to 22. This is the last batch that I actually watched, and I'll just say right off the bat, it's not nearly as good, but I don't think it's bad. I think it starts off bad because immediately the story's more convoluted. Immediately, it's harder to follow what's going on, and it's just not as funny. Like I said, the midget stuff started to get kind of Adam Sandler-y. This chapter gets there a few times as well. Actually, more, yeah, Adam Sandler, Medea, I guess. It gets kind of dumb, and not in a good way. But on the flip side, at least the first like half or maybe 2/3 of these chapters actually has some more interesting story elements. Like, it stops with every single chapter is just like another person cheating on somebody. Like, that stops in this block, which is good because that would have gotten old. And a lot of this, the main story for a lot of this is like Sylvester and Tuan, who is his brother, who just got out of jail. Who, by the way, when he came home in the last set of chapters, they immediately shoot him in the shoulder, which he then is like, "I'm fine." Then they bandage him up, and he's fine. that I didn't mention that. I love that. But here, him and Tuan are like it becomes like a mystery story almost, where they're like investigating these what's going on with the pastor who was gay and the woman who Sylvester originally slept with, and then these two women who Tuan believes got him into the prison. And it becomes actually more interesting, and even without the comedy, granted it's still funny as shit for a lot of it. And again, it's like he's singing it all in like this crooning R&B voice, which just makes even the stuff that would otherwise be easy to take seriously just completely impossible to take seriously.
Yeah, I don't think we can overstate that enough, because it's not just that he goes into this level of absurdity that's like hard to even talk about really without having seen it. It's also the added level of him literally crooning everything that's happening.
Yeah.
All the dialogue, all the events, and you're supposed to be taking this with some sort of serious, like, even though it's not serious for most of it, I mean, there is like character development that's happening and character situations, and it's all R. Kelly on the top of this with that track that's happening pretty much the whole time.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, the musical element just enhances this like through and through. Like this would be really, really bad if it didn't have the music. I mean, it would just be a soap opera and not a funny one, you know. And it would be like an Adam Sandler parody of a soap opera. But the music, oh my god. But yeah, I guess. But again, another problem, it starts to jump back and forth between characters that I do care about and characters that I don't care about. And it just gets more complicated in some ways, and it's just not as funny, it's not as entertaining. And especially the last few chapters are just not good. Like there's one where he goes to like this mafia guy, this like mafia boss, and the whole thing, I'm not even fucking kidding, the whole chapter, or most of the chapter at least, is it was all a dream. And like there's a chapter where they actually do that. And that's just I can't forgive that. No, you don't do that. That's bad. No, bad. And then the final chapter 22, is absolutely awful. If I'll have to watch to 33, but like chapter 22, absolutely awful. That was a bad note to end it on. That's the one where like they're all in little circles and they're calling on their phones talking about the gay pastor, but we already knew he was a gay pastor. Like there's nothing new to it anymore to add. Right. But it comes back around as if it was some big twist. It just doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I would say, do you have anything else to say on this middle block?
I mean, no. Like I'll wrap it up after you. You can go ahead and say whatever you want to say.
Yeah, I think this middle block, I would agree, especially as you get to the later parts of this middle block, it starts to get a little weak. It feels like he loses control of the reins a bit, especially because he basically diverges all these characters into their own little threads. And it gets, I wouldn't say it gets hard to follow necessarily, but I think he has a hard time following even where he's taking this stuff.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing that I would mention is that even though this thing goes up to what, 30 something is it now?
33, yeah.
He still has said it's not done. So this is like a thing that's going to live in perpetuity.
Oh man.
Which I think is incredible. But anyway, so what are your thoughts on this middle block?
Yeah, so I'd give this one a 6 because I liked it, and like I said, I think for a lot of it, the story actually gets more interesting, and in a way, it actually gets better of a story because the comedic angle of everybody cheats on everybody just stops being funny after a while. So I'm glad that he switches it up, but yeah, it's very flawed. It's not as consistently enjoyable as the first 12 chapters for sure. And I do think it starts to lose something. I mean, just as anything naturally would, because the first 12 chapters were just as many chapters as there needed to be for that joke to continue being funny. And once you have to change it up, I don't know if you're going to find a formula that works as well as what was going in the first 12 chapters. So it's kind of inevitable. But, I mean, I was still surprised he managed to still keep it interesting in some ways and still made it entertaining. So, yeah, I mean, I still liked it, I guess.
And do you want to go ahead and give your final thoughts on the whole thing, and then I'll give mine?
So if I were to just average the scores together, this would be a 7, I guess. But I don't know that I want to do that because it really does feel to me, especially with the way that it was released, that chapter 1 to 12 is like Trapped in the Closet 1, and like chapters 13 to 22 is like Trapped in the Closet 2. You know, so it's really hard for me to like rank it all with both of them. But yeah, I guess I can just cut it in the middle and say 7, just because the first half was great and really entertaining. Second half of these two blocks, not as much, but you know, still fine, still entertaining, still enjoyable, still funny. Again, I'm still surprised it didn't get boring, given that it really was like the same song over and over and over again.
So, okay, my thoughts on this, and I say this completely unironically. This is one of my favorite things to exist.
Awesome.
The entirety of Trapped in the Closet is just this masterwork of comedy that I cannot describe. I think the number of times I have recommended that people listen to this thing, because it's almost like, and you brought this up at the beginning, Weird Al parodied this, but this is already a parody of itself. Like, it cannot be undersold how absurd and weird this thing is, to a point where oftentimes, even when you question its seriousness, it is hilarious just because the fact that R. Kelly is singing over this whole thing.
Yeah.
And so the first 12, I think, are just brilliant, just so weird and hilarious. It does dip a little bit, but then when he comes back with that, what I guess you would call Trapped in the Closet 3, it just goes completely off the rails in a hilarious way. He brings in, I don't remember if it was in the middle block or not, but this pimp character who basically becomes the new main character for no discernible reason.
Yeah, he was brought in the second block. I did not want to see more of that character, but maybe that gets better.
He becomes the main character, and then there's also this like old man and old woman, which I think R. Kelly plays both of them for some reason, and they just bicker like the whole time. I don't even know where he goes with it or where he's planning to take this thing, but it is just consistently so much fun to go back and watch. So and then he releases a Christmas album about eating panties or whatever. So I don't know what the guy's doing.
Yeah. So do you have a score and a recommendation? Oh, I should say I recommend chapters 1 to 12 and chapters 13 to 22. If you liked chapters 1 to 12, then you can keep watching, I guess. But, you know, definitely the first block for sure.
Yeah, and I would definitely recommend this thing. I think as a whole, it's definitely not perfect. It has some low points, but I think it's just so easy to put on, and just, especially with a group of people, and I'll just be like, what is even going on? So I'd probably give this whole thing, all the chapters that released, so Trapped in the Closet as a whole, I'd probably give it a 9 is probably where I feel about it. I mean, I really do unironically enjoy this thing. I just love going back to it.
Yeah, I'm glad. I thought that you were, I assumed you hated this as I was watching it. I thought we were going to disagree. Like, I mean, I knew that you were going to find it funny just as I did, because I've heard you mention it before. But I'm glad we're on the same page of unironic enjoyment, because this is great. Like, I really enjoyed it. But I do want to point out, actually, a side note I wanted to mention. We mentioned that Weird Al parody. I actually think that Weird Al parody is, like, better at... like, I actually think it's better. Like, I think it's a better product. It's as a parody, it's basically just, instead of trying to outdo this because you can't, it basically just underdoes it. And I actually find that a lot funnier. And since they're both comedies, I think it's fair to compare them. I think Weird Al's Trapped in the Closet is better than R. Kelly's Trapped in the Closet, for a totally different reason, I guess. But yeah, that's the last thing that I wanted to throw in there. But yeah, I'm definitely gonna keep watching. I mean, I do want to see where it goes. But oh my god, if I don't know that I'm gonna keep up with him if he still wants to keep making more. I think it's ridiculous that there are 33 chapters of this, and it's still wait. So just to be clear, up to 33, is it still using the same instrumental? Is it like still the same song? Oh my god. Could you imagine he goes up like Trapped in the Closet 240 and it's still the same song?
Yeah, R. Kelly on his deathbed.
Oh man.
Well, I'm hoping this is basically his Aeneid, and someone takes over for him when he dies to finish the Trapped in the Closet.
Right. That would be what if it perpetually continues down the family lineage?
Yeah, humanity is destroyed, but there is only Trapped in the Closet.
Oh man, that would be great. I would love that. Oh god. Okay.
All right.
So I think we're gonna move on to the recommendations, huh?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I'll go first because we did my recommendation first. Okay. So I recommend a game that's been very popular. We already talked about this, so I gotta break the illusion, guys. I'm sorry. But yeah, I recommend Doki Doki Literature Club. Everybody's been talking about it. It'll get us tons of views, and then we'll be
that's all that matters.
#1 most subscribed podcast on YouTube history.
Time to get that good SEO. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. No, so let's see. What can I say about this? I'm sure you're already aware that it's a visual novel. Like, I guess you could call it a dating sim. And there are other genres as well, but if I say them, it'll spoil everything. Although, to be fair, the game kind of spoils itself on the Steam page. But, let's see. What else do I want to say about this? I can't really say much. All I can say is that this is specific to my recommendation because I only played the game through once, and I want to be able to talk about the same thing. So go after Yuri, the girl Yuri, because there's like three or something different ways to play the game, and I didn't play the other one. So make sure you do it that way.
Okay.
And I think that's pretty much it. And then we'll talk about that. Okay, and now on to yours.
Okay, and I recommend to you a pretty recent television show, actually. Came out in 2017, now still ongoing. I recommend to you Riverdale. This is a drama on the CW, which is based on the Archie comics characters. Riverdale being the town that the Archie comics characters live in. I'm going to recommend to you the first season, which you can find now on a lot of streaming services. It's about 13 episodes, so I would say you could probably get through 7 and have a good sense, but if you do want to power through to all 13, I've watched that first season as well, so we can talk about the full season.
Okay.
I think it started... it was like a half season, started in, I believe, last January and went through to May. And I think it was originally piloted actually as a film, I want to say. And then that same producer went on to actually transform it more into a television show. Got picked up for a second season, so it's still ongoing.
Okay. All right, is that all you have to say about that?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I guess that does it for this episode of Let Me Put the Thing Up Here. Wait, up. There we go. I guess that does it for this episode of Get Recc'd. Is there anything that we need to say at the end? I don't even know if there is.
Yeah, and let's see, any housekeeping. So this one came a little late. I think we talked about it last time.
Yeah.
Again, we're trying to get back on track to a bi-weekly, but there's always schedules to contend with, but we will try our best to get this back onto a a bi-weekly, which I learned can mean both 2 times in 1 week and twice every other week. So
Yeah.
that's an awesome word.
We mean
in
every other
English.
week.
Right. So a fortnightly cadence. Any other housekeeping? I think last time we talked about hopefully trying to get this onto maybe other hosting services. Still trying to look into that. We're still definitely open to. I think we have a couple different maybe themed episodes on the pipeline, or at least as thoughts, and we're still open to hearing if anyone has any special themes, or if anyone has any recs for us. I think we talked about maybe potentially having an episode where someone from our listening group would make a recommendation, and then we would both listen to it and give our thoughts in that way as well. So more to come on those. I think we're going to try to get more themed episodes in, right? Just to kind of break it up a little bit every now and then.
I was wanting to do one for this episode, but I changed my mind. So I think let's do it for the next episode. We'll talk about it after this because I don't have an idea particularly, but let's say that next episode will have a themed recommendation.
Or 2 episodes from now. So our recommendation for next episode will be a theme, and then we'll use that theme for the episode after. Yep. So anything else on your end?
No, I think that is it.
Okay. Well, then with that, those were our thoughts. Those were our recommendations. Get wrecked.